And welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith companion channel, the Evidence Reasons Academy. I'm joined by Paul, and let me unmute him. Paul, feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, I've been interested in the relationship between science and religion ever since I was in college and did a double major in theology and chemistry. I continued that interest when I went to medical school and got an MD. They were pushing us those days, and I actually got it in 3 years. And at the same time, I got a master's in religion. So I've actually done Greek and homiletics and all that stuff, in addition to some fairly heavy duty, but, well, as one finds out when one does this kind of thing, there's actually a lot of interplay between the various studies that one can do. Knowledge is basically united. I found out kind of serendipitously that when I took medicine, I had chosen the very best foreign language to learn, which is Greek. Because there's all kinds of Greek in medicine. There's also all kinds of Latin, but most of the Latin you can fudge, even if you don't know it. But the Greek is Greek to most people. It's Greek to me, but then I understand Greek, so that made it a lot easier.
Well, if I could brag on you a little bit, Paul was at the top of his when he took the medical exams. He was the section on chemistry. He got the highest score possible, and so it's great when he and I interact on chemistry issues, which are very important in the creation evolution controversy. And in addition to that, I've been impressed with some of the medical doctors that have been associated with Loma Linda. They ended up being really good in geology and also, radiometric dating, as you have. So if you'd like to talk, let me just tell the readers what happened yesterday. Paul had seen some of my debates and some of my discussions on radiometric dating, and he called me and I was like, "How did you get my number?" And I'm glad to hear from him. We'd interacted before, and I just felt bad imposing on his time, and I was just like, I can't believe I got his time and he's calling me. And so as we were discussing and talking about all these interesting things, I said, "Paul, can you come on my channel? People need to hear what you and I are saying to each other and the information we're exchanging, because you're describing what sort of experiments we ought to do and computations and explorations we ought to do to further the young earth creationist case." And I'm sorry to get a little bit on my soapbox, but I'm seeing, having been a part of the creationist movement, I'm seeing quite a lot of creationists invest time and stuff that is not really defeating the evolutionary argument. They're spending time on things like baraminology, just lots of arguments over that. And and then we're all fighting for resources and time and donations. But Paul has identified with me some things that I would put a high priority as far as experimental investigations that could really break the case for young earth creationism. So Paul, feel free to describe. By the way, I looked up a Berylium 10 paper, and they didn't dig as deep as you wanted into the earth, but their 3.5 meter dig showed an invariance as you predicted. So maybe you can start to describe what you're trying to do, and
Sure.
we can put up some. I can put up if you ask me to Google something and put something up on the screen, I might be able to do it on your behalf. This is the first time Paul has been on StreamYard, and first time I guess he used Firefox on his Mac computer. It took us 45 minutes. We were tempted to give up, but I asked Schnoil to pray, and he did, and we got it working.
Well, yeah, I think probably it would be worthwhile just simply going over beryllium 10, what it is, and how it's supposed to work. And the fact of the matter is that at one time, I did a lot of my initial studies after having been handed a book by a long-age friend of mine who's actually not sure there's a God, but who said it has to be longer than 6,000 or 7,500 or 10,000 or even 100,000 years. It has to be, you know, in the realm of millions of years. So he handed me a book by Mavis Guy and Helmut Schleicher called Absolute Age Determination. And he said, this'll persuade you. Well, it didn't, because as I kept reading, they kept qualifying how you had to be careful because there was this problem with this dating method and that problem with that dating method. And yeah, you know, if you looked at it generously, it was impressive. If you looked at it a little less generously, it didn't look quite as impressive. And I had already been working on some of the stuff on carbon-14 because I had a sense that we might be able to find carbon-14 in material that was old enough that it really shouldn't have it. So I read this book carefully, and there were like 76 different methods, and I categorized them carefully. Some of them were young, like tritium dating. Well, the half-life of tritium is 25 years. It's not going to give you dates anywhere near close enough to distinguish between creation and evolution. Some of them were in the, didn't really take effect for a billion years or more. And at that time, I felt that it was reasonable to assume that the Earth was old and that life on Earth was what we would be fighting over. And so I ruled those out. Now, it may turn out that we need to pay more attention to them, but as I've thought of it, I'm not sure that they're major challenges. The only one that might be a major challenge would be samarium neodymium dating. Then there are ones that are kind of mixtures of other methods. Well, if the other methods don't stand up, I'm not sure that mixing them really helps that much. By the time you get done sifting all of those methods down, it turns out that you have probably about 10 or 15 methods actually. And the major ones are going to come down to potassium argon and a few relatives of it, rubidium strontium, and potassium calcium, which turns out to be very similar to rubidium strontium, and uranium lead, and After that, it gets kind of thin. Uranium disequilibrium dating is interesting, but I'm concerned that it is not well enough established to stand on its own 2 feet. And one of the dating methods that was there was Berylium-10 dating. And the book rated that as a mostly failed method, which was interesting to me. And of course, one of the questions you ask is, why is it a failed method? So what you have to realize is Berylium-10 is made by cosmic rays. Well, Wikipedia says it right there, cosmic ray spallation of nitrogen and oxygen. So basically, nitrogen and oxygen are broken apart and leave Berylium-10. And it has a specific half-life of, I think, 1.5 million years or something like that. And the idea is that for items that are less than, say, 5 or 6 half-lives, conceivably, you could measure the amount of Berylium-10 that was in them, and if you could figure out how much Berylium-10 was being made at any given time, you could say something about their age. Now, there are actually 2 ages. Just a minute, let me take that down. There are actually 2 ages that we have to look at. One of them is how much Berylium-10 has been built up by cosmic rays, let's say in a hunk of granite that's sitting there. And the other one is how much Berylium-10 is left from something that's been out there for a while. For example, a meteorite that fell. You should be able to, if you can figure out how much Berylium-10 is being made, say that so much of it should have decayed away. And, you know, if you have some kind of idea of how much your background was to begin with, you could say, well, you lost half of it, or you lost 3/4 of it, or you lost 1/10 of it. And it gets kind of muddy because, well, supposing that you only know to within 10% what the original level was, then trying to measure something that is, 1/10 of a half-life becomes an exercise in futility. Because how would you know whether it's really that old, or maybe it's twice that old, or maybe it's not aged at all? Because you just simply started out with less than you thought you did. And because of technical problems like that, the book said it was a failed method. They went on to point out that some of the places that they had tried to use it were in ocean sediments, which presumably you could measure the amount of Berylium-10 in a particular deposit, and then you would go down however many feet, measure it again, and if it was half of that, then it took 1.5 million years to get to the new level. And continuing on, that's what you'd wind up getting. Go down another, let's say that measurement was 3 feet. Then you go down another 3 feet, and you should get 1/4 of the amount of Berylium-10, and so forth. Now, of course, that all assumes that Berylium-10 is being deposited at the same rate, or at least at the same rate with relationship to the sediments that are being accumulated. And in fact, well, you can imagine the mathematics that would get twisted if either of those was not a constant rate. Well, if you're a creationist and you believe in a worldwide flood, that would create havoc with the amount of sediment you're getting. So this already doesn't look like a major threat to creationism in that particular setting. And in fact, maybe I can pull up where I have written on this, because
I can help you also with that if it's on your theology.
It is.
Okay, what was the scientific theology?
Theology, it would be about page... Let's see if I even have it here.
Would it be in chapter 5?
Be in chapter 5, yes.
Okay. I'm bringing it up here. And the readers, this is available on the website. I put Paul's website in the video description, so you can go find it. This is...
So let's scroll down to near the bottom of it.
Okay.
It'll be... Keep going. It's a little further. Let's see. It's about 180.
188. There it is. Ocean floors no consistent gradients of B10. Ocean floors show no consistent gradients of beryllium 10. When we had that conversation yesterday, it didn't register where you were getting. Where it didn't register at the time until you explained the absence of gradients. That means no matter how far you dig, you're going to get the same concentration of beryllium 10. Which
yes.
Doesn't make sense.
And if I can, if we can scroll down a little further to where I can read the note, is there any way of enlarging this for me?
Yes. Give me a moment. I'll make it bigger.
Okay, good. Yeah. Now keep going under. Keep going down further now. That's easily readable now. Continue. Let's do the next. Yeah, here we go. And you'll notice that, I mean, I'm not taking this out of any, in fact, this is not out of a creationist journal at all. One of the principles I did when I was doing this review was to leave creationist journals out of it. Most of the time, almost all of the time. Because, see, creationists might cherry pick, and so you might get a higher concentration than you might otherwise see. And I didn't want to be looking at this from a cherry pick point of view. But this is actually from Earth and Planetary Science Letters. And Inoue and Tanaka, the scarcities of cores having a uniform beryllium-10 concentration at different depths suggests that the sediment at the ocean floors has not been sedimentation at the ocean floors has not been uniform, but disturbed by some geophysical event in the past. What event could that be? And I noticed that there was a little cherry picking on the other side, because it's of interest that wherever the data roughly matches an exponential curve, it is assumed that production and deposition of beryllium-10 and sedimentation rates have all been constant. And then I cited, actually, I think this is, yeah, I'm in BS et al. If you go back to note 141 in this chapter, I had so many notes, and they're long notes, and I really didn't want to keep repeating them. Or worse yet, say I bid, and then you have no clue as to where it is, or what reference site. So I said see note 141. So you go back to 141, and in fact, if you look at this in the HTML version, you can actually click on note 141 and go there instantly. So they also noted a high frequency. Did this just? Yeah, there we go. Of cores with erratic beryllium-10 concentrations at different depths, even within depths of only 1 meter, suggesting that the ocean floor is physically disturbed in many regions, whereas later evidence indicates that, and we'll go to the next page, given the evolutionary timescale, or as I would say now, the standard geological timescale, production rates have at least varied. And there's a reference for that. I mean, this is not what I'm saying. This is what the evidence has made other people say.
Well, this is interesting because in my debate with PhD Tony, he kept saying, look at all the concordance with cosmogenic dating. And then you picked up on that, and I could tell you probably wanted to weigh in and say, what about beryllium-10?
Well, actually, he said beryllium-10, and I was going, does he have any idea?
Yeah, no. Because I was reluctant to say, I wanted to say, Dr. Tony, have you considered your data is pretty heavily cherry picked? I didn't want to go that far because I didn't have anything to back it, but I suspected that. And like we said to each other yesterday, we said there could be cherry picking
if you don't know.
Yeah.
In fact, what I will often do is, if I'm not really sure, is I say, can you give me some references so that I can look that up?
Yeah. In a short, this was a theater debate. It's not about getting after the truth.
Yeah.
That's the text-based debates are, if you have at least someone who's a halfway honest partner, opponent, he will provide that. You could request it. And some of these debates in text have lasted years and have been very productive for me and not very productive for the other side, because we're able to be more careful, and it's not about theater or trying to, one up the other guy in just 1 hour. I've been in debates that have lasted years before I finally prevailed.
Well, I think that it's important to view them as partners anyway, rather than opponents, because, unless they're being deliberately dishonest, which most of the time I don't think they are. They actually view they may be shallow, or they may be misunderstanding stuff or something like that. But most of the time, they're actually spouting the party line, and they learned it from the party, and they believe it.
It depends on the level of qualification of the other. I found that when I deal with academics, it's better.
Well, that's because they know a little bit more about it, and they've read more books like Absolute Age Determination rather than what their high school or college textbook told them. Because the textbook picks all the cherries and sets it out in a beautiful bowl.
And I did want to say, so let's see. I did a very quick Google. Yeah, I think this is it. Let me see if I could find it. And I just wanted to share it with you. And this will lead to the experiments and observations you were suggesting. Let me bring it up. I'm going to try to get this a little bit deeper. But there's a graph here.
Nature paper?
Huh?
Is this the Nature paper?
Uh,
Oh, okay. This is something else.
right. So a study of soil formation rates of 10 beryllium, the wet dry tropics of northern Australia. Now they only dug between 1 meter and 5 meters. It's not very deep, but I did want to show you this erratic. You could see the amount of beryllium as it varies with depth. So one time you did have it decrease with depth, but then other times you had it kind of, not exactly doing that. And yeah, that's all that I had. You could
Now see, theoretically, um, one would want to know how far cosmic rays penetrate, and that would require doing some measurements, and you'd have to ask also which cosmic rays, because some of them are more efficient at producing beryllium-10 from oxygen and nitrogen than others. And in fact, it may spallate more than oxygen for all we know. It may spallate, let's say, sulfur or silicon or something like that as well. It turns out there are all kinds of reactions that take place when high energy cosmic rays hit a nuclide. So what you're seeing here is, well, let's just say it's not the same quality as carbon-14, for example. The numbers are, as you noted, kind of all over the place.
Yes. Well, they're saying this is soil formation. They concluded that there must be a lot of disturbances to the soil surface, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But just going to what, for the reader's benefit, what you had suggested, which made let's dig real deep.
To the second part, which, if we can go back to the book there, I've been wanting to do further studies, but have so far been prevented from it. Let's go back to the top of this page. The next paragraph. In addition, lava apparently formed from subducted ocean floors, which contain beryllium-10 from cosmic ray production, contains up to 7 times 10 to the 6th atoms per gram of material of beryllium-10. Whereas isolated volcanoes like Kilauea in Hawaii have 0.1 times 10 to the 6 atoms per gram of beryllium-10. However, a basalt from the Columbia River Plateau with an evolutionary age of 14 million years contained 1.0 times 10 to the 6th atoms of beryllium-10. And there's a reference there. We'll go down to that in just a bit because it is fascinating. The half-life of beryllium-10 is 1.5 million years, and I don't think there's that much controversy over it. I mean, it might be 1.4, it might be 1.6. Exactly how close that is not totally clear, but it's in that general area, and it obviously, according to standard theory, it should not change. So if we assume that this lava started out with the highest known modern concentration of beryllium-10, so we're going to assume that it's up to 7 times 10 to the 6th, and you let it decay for 14 million years at 1.5 million years per half-life, and you can figure out what the decay constant is, and you can do a pretty quick calculation. And when you get done, you expect 0.01 times 10 to the 6 atoms per gram of material of beryllium-10 that should be left. Where the extra beryllium-10 came from is hard to say, assuming the standard geologic timescale, but it's quite easy if the lava flow in question happened only a few thousand years ago. I think that's the end of the paragraph. And can we go down to the note again?
Yes. Can I just pause a little bit for the viewer's benefit?
Sure.
I just did that calculation. So it's something that's 14 million years old, and it had beryllium-10 in it of 1.0. That doesn't make sense because I ran through this. You would get less than 0.1% of the remaining. So this is 0.1%.
Well, we started out with 7.
Yeah, so 7.
So it'd be 0.007. It would actually be less than that a little. Well,
I'll give you the factor that it's off by. We have 146 times more beryllium-10 than theory would predict. So of course they would say this is contamination of surface or whatever.
Well, that's the problem. It's not actually contamination. It's lack of contamination. There isn't enough beryllium-10. I mean, they'd say it's, yeah, that's right. It's, they have less beryllium-10. You're correct. They have less beryllium-10 predicted than what we see. Way less. You're off by a factor of
126. It was supposed to be for 14 million years. I have my calculator up here.
Yeah.
So that would be 10 half-life cycles, and that would equate to about roughly 0.1%. But
it's actually 9.25 half-life cycles, so it's a little over that. But yeah, you can calculate it. It's
so
not
right. So if the maximum is 7, and we had 1, so I divide 1 divided by 7, that equals 0.14. And then I divide 0.14 by that really teeny tiny number. It means we're off by about 150, a factor of 150. So they'll just say that it's contaminated by something that added all that extra beryllium-10.
Right.
So much cosmogenic dating.
No, I
want
to scroll down to the note now, if I can,
okay.
before we start hypothesizing beyond. Again, this is Faure Isotope Geology. I think it's the 2nd edition. Citing Brown, Klein, Middleton, etc. in Nature, which is, you have to distrust them a little bit. They're a creationist organization. And on page 718, they state that the phenomenon, and I'm quoting their paper, certainly gives one pause.
Wow.
In other words, they realize the implications of this. And well, maybe it's a cosmic rays. And I said it would be interesting to test this theory by dating basalts from different depths. About 10 meters should be sufficient for testing purposes. Which is 30 feet, 33 feet, I think, which is about twice the attenuation that you get from air itself. Again, I don't know. Maybe those things penetrate further than we think. But the people who do beryllium-10 measurements all think that that you should have beryllium-10 on top of the granite and not, going all the way through. Although apparently some of the soil stuff suggests that it does go quite a ways through. Now, is that because it's mixed, or is that because the cosmic rays penetrate further than we think? Or at least the cosmic rays that matter penetrate more than we think. And so that's the question. And of course, let's just say that this is not how you get your PhD, by investigating a phenomenon like this. And it's not how you get funded to study beryllium-10, is by investigating phenomena like this. But from a creationist point of view, it's fascinating, and it would be interesting to go down and find a borehole that's goes 30 meters or maybe 100 meters, and then go down and see how much beryllium-10 you have per gram of material at various depths, and see whether it corresponds with the cosmic ray hypothesis. I think the final defense would be, well, beryllium-10 is just a failed method. But, if creationists could make sense of it, and those who have a longer time frame could not make as much sense with it, there is no such thing as a silver bullet. But I think that lead bullets are still useful sometimes.
Yes. So they are postulating that the cosmic rays can go deeper and hit a nitrogen source somewhere or oxygen source somewhere deep inside
the oxygen down there. And like I say, if you start throwing other things like aluminum or silicon, we may find out that there are more atoms that can be spalated appropriately to produce beryllium-10.
Okay.
So, there's a lot of interesting research to be done, but because even the good ones, even the good papers are not that good, and the bad papers, as you can see, are atrocious if you're trying to fit this into a long-age model. I don't think this research is going to be done by anybody without a creationist bent.
And given all that we're reading, it's amazing. Dr. Tony was saying, have you studied cosmogenic dating in beryllium-10? I'm just like, you couldn't have picked the worst one for his model. It's like there had to be some heavy cherry picking to make that work. Goodness.
Well, but see, if you get the results that you like, then you publish them. If you don't get results that you like, well, sometimes you publish them, because otherwise we wouldn't see papers like this. But sometimes you don't, and I think that you get enough papers that just aren't working, or perhaps enough data that never results in a paper, that pretty soon people who are experts in the field, like Guy and Schleicher are, go, this method really isn't very good. You just shouldn't pay much attention to it. See, but in the meantime, if somebody has been fed the good papers, that person is just really impressed, and then will use it in the middle of an argument without really knowing the literature well or understanding what's going on.
Well, I have an example of that, and it was they were able to. The mainstream had discredited what a minority felt was very good research. They found bacteria buried in salt or ambers in 200 million year formations. They're very careful to avoid to prevent contamination. They extracted it. It had a genome similar to that of modern bacteria.
This is the New Mexico stuff, right?
I don't know if it was New Mexico, but
It's Permian material in and I want to say Vreeland was one of the guys that did some of the work.
well, so all that got discredited because the evolutionists said, look, it is so similar because evolutionary theory is true. That must be contamination. Didn't bother at all looking at the laboratory examination. And I'm just like, oh, okay, so we can enforce the narrative no matter what. They're going to come up with some, and that's not very good science. But I'm trusting that something will come up. It's becoming increasingly difficult. I will tell you I talked to a geochronologist. They said the chemical dates, like saying the dinosaur fossils or any fossil, are very problematic. They said that,
meaning finding collagen and stuff like that.
yes. So, and it's the chemical condition. So, like Brian Thomas said, what are peptide bonds still hanging around for 70 million years? And their oxidation profiles, and then racemization, which is more of what I'm familiar with. And we can find all sorts of other chemical dates. So this isn't going to stop. And then, with the carbon-14, as you point, even with the work that Jordan K., he and I presented, if we can establish, as you said, if we have fossil samples that don't have uranium near there, or any other neutron source, what is the recourse? And that was something, just for the viewers, that was something that Paul and I discussed yesterday about the whole carbon-14 dating thing. We have experiments we need to do. Speaking of which, if you want to, whenever you feel like going to that topic, feel free to take that up on the carbon-14 experiments.
Yeah, carbon-14 is where I cut my teeth on in this particular area. Maybe it's worth saying how I got to where I am. If you're going to be a physician, you can't just ignore science. You use it too much, and that it's at least some of the science is very good. Now, it turns out that not as much as we think is very good is very good. There's that horrible paper, report that was put out, and I think there's a paper behind it, where Amgen was getting ready to invest billions, literally, into cancer drugs. But before they just threw their billions in there, they wanted to see how good the field was. And so they picked, I think it's about 53 of what they considered landmark papers that one could start developing some kind of drug or immunotherapy or something for. And so they basically just got the papers and they repeated them. And of the 53 papers, they were able to reproduce 6. That's scary. 47 of the 53 could not be reproduced by an independent lab that wanted desperately to reproduce them. And this is medicine. It doesn't even have anything to do with creation, evolution, or whether there's a God looking over your shoulder.
Well, this was an interest to that point, and this was really dealing with the medical field. There was a paper called Why Most Published Research Findings Are False in 2005. And this is kind of a classic case study written by John Ioannidis at the Stanford School of Medicine. So this is a respectable, and it was published in PLOS Medicine. It is considered foundational to the field of metascience. In the paper, Ioannidis argued that a large number, if not the majority, of published medical research papers contain results that cannot be replicated. In simple terms, the essay states that scientists use hypothesis testing to determine whether scientific discoveries are significant. Significance is formalized in terms of probability, and it goes into this. And he said, then he constructed a statistical model which indicates that most published findings are false positive results. The reason
I'm sure that either cites the paper that I was talking about or is cited by it. They would give more numbers. This is a theoretical underpinning. What I was talking about was an actual test of that hypothesis.
I'd say that hypothesis got confirmed by Amgen. And this came to my attention because a paper I'm co-authoring with, he is a professor at Mahari Medical College, and he teaches it. He's teaching statistics. He gives his students this paper, specifically this paper, to begin to understand statistics. And he said, you can argue on either side of the, how accurate this is or not, but you have to learn the math. But that got passed on to me, and I was like, that's really kind of interesting for medical research. You could have that many false positives.
Well, there's a little more background behind it, and that apparently one of the papers. I mean, these were people. They were, getting big grants, and it was high-powered research, and they talked to one of the authors of one of the papers and said, we tried to reproduce your paper and we couldn't get it to work. We tried 13 times and nothing would come out. What was your trick? And the person who was publishing the paper said, well, actually, we tried it 5 times. And on the 5th time, we got a statistically significant result, so we published that.
Oh, my goodness. That's terrible.
I mean, statistical significance means most of the time that you can get that by chance less than 1 time out of 20. Well, if you do it, 13 plus 5 is 18 times, then getting one of it by chance that's positive is no better than, or slightly better than random, but not much.
Yes. And I actually know that because I've been a casino gambler. And the reason I needed to point that out is sometimes a gambler will get lucky and he'll come up with a theory that's totally bogus and he thinks he's figured it out. So,
like I just wear my red shirt.
Right. So randomly, one guy out of 20 is going to have a theory that's kind of confirmed until he has really a huge number of trials. I have witnessed personally, firsthand, like 4 or 5 sigma events because I played that many hands of blackjack. I'm embarrassed to say it's probably on the order of 30, 40,000 hands.
Well, I think you can actually win at blackjack if you know what you're doing.
Well, I was a card counter. That's why I played so many hands to get
Yeah.
a lot of large numbers. So there are times I got 2, 3, 4 blackjacks in a row, and they say that's just not going to happen. It's like, well, if you play enough hands, you'll see that. Um, and so I could see where they could just throw enough trials at it and then not report all the failures. And yeah, it's like we got it to work after the 5th try. It's like, no, if you really want something statistically significant, you better do like 100 trials and have success like 99% of the time or better.
Well, that's why one study is no studies. That's an aphorism that's used in medicine. And it's also why in physics, if you want to prove a new theory, I think you have to have a threshold of 1 in a billion or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I was in the engineering profession, and I just said, okay, let's say you built a theory about your pistons working in an engine. You can, I start my car up, and I've had engines that have gone for like 400,000 miles. As long as all the attendant stuff around the engine block is working, it went. And I'm just like, that's what I call repeatability. You think about all the piston firings that had to happen for that thing to work. It's amazing. And then finally the engine block died. But I'm just like, for some of these theories that are out there, particularly in origins theories of the age of the Earth and evolution, and especially abiogenesis, and like you don't have anything of that level of confidence that you do in even typical engineering, which I call applied physics applications.
Yeah. Well, this is the point: is that if you pick cherries, you're going to get cherries. If you pick long enough, and you need to start to be able to say that you get 5% cherries, or maybe 50% cherries if you pick a defined area, if you're going to be sure. And a lot of stuff is, well, there is a bias that says if you get results that make sense to us, we'll accept them. And by the way, that's not an unreasonable bias. Somebody tells me that Toyotas are great. I buy a Toyota, I run it, it goes 225,000 miles before the engine quits. I go, yeah, I'll buy another Toyota. Because I don't want to buy 20 Toyotas and see, where the median is. I don't have time for that kind of stuff. And if we're in medicine, we have one patient we have to treat. You don't have time to try to run some kind of a scientific trial. If you do it 3 or 4 times and it works, you go, well, it must be pretty good. And it may take a long time before you reverse course and say, this drug really doesn't do anything. And then, of course, you throw in the placebo effect on top of that, and you may actually be doing them some good just simply because you're treating them. And so we're able to accept results that we believe we'll accept. Results that, go against everything we have been taught. Boy, I'm going to need a lot of proof before I'm going to change.
I know that. And sometimes like abiogenesis is dying a painful death because they're scoring by it for such a long time. But now the top researchers are starting to say, nah, we need multiple universes to solve this problem. It just doesn't align with the chemistry. Before we take Noel's comment here, we wanted to relate this to the carbon-14 the specific experiments you were suggesting, and because we were talking about the confirmation bias and the rejecting things,
Yeah.
and we wanted to find experiments that would really that are repeatable and can falsify. So
Mhm.
some of these had to do with, like, say, uh, uh, just like the finding correlations. If there is no uranium in coal, we need to have accurate measurements of the uranium in coal, and
And
also
also,
the.
if we have the technology for it, measuring the neutron flux in coal,
Okay,
the natural neutron flux.
and seeing if there's a correlation with the carbon-14 there, that
Yes,
would be very.
exactly.
Okay, that's an experiment. Okay, and that would be something that probably is not, we could do a lot of, we could do that, and that would, we would start to have confidence the more that the experiment is repeated
Right.
and replicated. Okay.
The one thing to keep in mind is that you can't conduct science as if it was evangelism.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what I mean by that is we can't get the results that we like and then hype them up as if this proves what we need. Uh, every time we do an experiment, we have to go in with the ability to accept either positive or negative results,
Negative results. Yep.
or results that are diametrically opposed to what we expected.
And I want to convey this to the viewers. I like hearing that. And I've gotten criticized by creationists when I've gotten and said, we don't have enough data. Stop saying stuff like some of the stuff I'm hearing. We don't have the confidence in it. They get very irritated that I'll entertain the opposing side. But I said, how do you think you're going to be trusted if you're not willing to, if you don't have the attitude that your ideas might be falsified? They will just perceive you as an evangelist versus someone who's actually after the truth. And I hate to say this, but at some point, evangelism's just propagandizing, and we've had creationists doing that, and it's been hurting our cause. It has hurt our reputation and the level of perceived integrity. We have very bad reputation because of the bad behavior of certain individuals. And I don't need to name names because I already have in other channels. Um, but I really love hearing you say that. So
Well, it's
there was,
critical
yeah,
that if we're doing science, we let the data speak for itself. Now, if somebody else wants to take the data and run with it, that's, it's a free country. You do whatever you want to. Although I would encourage people to say, I have a case study of two people who were persuaded on the origin of life. And both times, as they tell the story, one of them was, by the way, Dean Kenyon.
yes,
And the story that he tells is I think there's a Lundgren or somebody like that at the University of Louisiana that told almost identical story. That a student came up to him. In fact, in both cases, it was a female student. I don't know whether that makes it easier or not, but it's only two cases. So who knows whether maybe females are more willing to do this. Maybe they're listened to better. Who knows? Maybe it's the luck of the draw. But in both cases, the student came up to him and said, I really appreciated your lecture. There were a few points I needed to clear up. And so she would ask, point one. And, not trying to prove to him that he was wrong, but just asking, how do you explain that? And he gave her the standard explanation, and she said, took notes on it. Okay, thank you very much. Point two, and went down, maybe 10 points or so. And then at the end, she said, you've been so helpful. Thank you so much. Closed up the notebook and walked off. And what happened in both cases is that as he's explaining, he's going, that wasn't really a very good explanation. That wasn't a good explanation either. I mean, it is the standard explanation, but doesn't really hold water when you look at it carefully. And he's saying this inside of himself. Basically, he left a little, thing she left a little thing in his head, kind of eating him up. And, it was the start of a train that eventually turned both of those people into not just believers in God, but believers in a short age creation. Because once you realize that the origin of life is a bunch of hooey. By the way, that's what happened to me personally, is that I expected to find, kind of equivocal evidence that you could ignore if you wanted to. But, there's probably some pretty good stuff, because that's all the hype that you got from all of your high school and college textbooks. Oh, yeah, we've almost got this solved. And then I started looking at it, going back to the original papers, and they did what?
And about how old were you when this happened?
About 20.
Wow. So did you? I mean, for the sake of the viewers, did you accept abiogenesis, naturalistic abiogenesis at that time?
No way.
I mean, before you started studying it.
Well, before I started studying it, it sounded like, a theory that if you wanted to, you could probably believe. There were a lot of people who were telling me, oh, don't try to study science from a religious point of view, because if you do, you're just going to get so many mixed signals that it'll be totally incomprehensible. And you'll wind up, well, you just have to have faith and, go with the Bible whenever whenever you have a choice. But what I discovered was that in the area of the origin of life research, the evidence is so one-sided. It is just pitiful. As you mentioned, there are people. I reviewed a paper by Eugene Koonin, who is definitely not a creationist, but he says, if you squint at it really hard, maybe you can get a ribozyme that will reproduce itself, that's 100 bases long, and maybe it will work. He says, but you've used up all the probability resources you have on Earth. And then if you want to switch over from that ribozyme to a system with ribosomes and transfer RNAs and, all of that other stuff, he says, you go so far. I think his back of the envelope calculations were 10 to the 1,008 or something like that. It's just, that this is like somebody telling you that Joe Biden won Powerball this week, and you know what? He won it last week, and you know what? He won it the week before. And matter of fact, for the last 7 times he's won Powerball. And you're trying to persuade me that this is all on the up and up? At a certain point you go, nah. As a matter of fact, if he wins it twice, I want to know whether his son is part of the commission.
Well, Schnoil has been so patient. He prayed for our stream. I'd like to if you could comment on this. He says, just like amino acids in the L configuration are used as evidence of contamination, when we find them in dinosaur soft tissues, ignoring data points makes it possible to claim equilibrium will happen. So he's pointing out that these people will say, oh, we found amino acids. We found them a large fraction in the L configuration. They would take that as proof that there's contamination rather than considering the possibility that it's young.
Well, yes, that's one answer. Another answer might be that collagen kind of locks them into the L configuration, so that even when it's been sitting there for millions of years, it hasn't switched over to the D because it's been held in the L configuration, and that's a possibility. Yes, and also we are here, so it must have happened. So basically, if you want to, you can exert enough faith to make it. But, and my attitude towards somebody who wants to persuade me that God doesn't exist and that this all just happened by itself is very simple. You know what? I don't lock and bar the door and pour cement on it. I go, okay, I'm willing to walk out that door with you. Let's go. But there is one thing. There's this big pile of debris right outside the door. And if you're going to get me to walk through that, you need to clear a significant portion of that debris out of there. To where I can feel comfortable walking that direction. And right now, that pile of debris is so high that, it's like somebody trying to persuade me that gravity doesn't exist. Well, okay, but, that doesn't fit with my experience. Well, I mean, we have to do this because there was a time when we thought we could prove this stuff. And we thought that the law of gravity was proved, and that's why we called it a law. And it turns out that it isn't quite a law. It's close, but it's not quite a law. And that's why the theory of relativity is called a theory precisely because they don't want to call it a law of relativity. We've already been burnt by that once. People who try to say it's only a theory. Well, relativity is only a theory too. If people liken evolution to gravity, I say more power to you. You just nailed your case. It's the fact of the matter is we don't know as much as we think we did. Even in my own specialty of medicine, when I started learning, we had absolute proof, or we thought, that bacteria had nothing to do with peptic ulcers.
Yep, I remember that.
And, I was trained that way and I thought that way, and they actually had good reason for that. They tried to culture it 6 ways from Sunday. Well, as it turned out, they should have done 7 ways from Sunday because somebody was able to finally culture the stuff. And we've got DNA from it, and we can do DNA analysis on it. And more importantly, it's of practical significance. If you give people certain combinations of antibiotics, you'll cure their ulcer about 85% of the time. That doesn't mean it's 100%, but it's high enough that it makes a big difference in medicine.
Yes.
And that goes against all the dogma that I was taught when I was in medical school. And I knew that dogma well.
Well, Dr. Giem, Paul, I look forward to us talking again. This is already about 1:30 in the morning for me here on the East Coast. And I really want to thank Schnoil for praying for our stream. We wrestled with technical difficulties to get Firefox running on a Macintosh computer. We tried Safari, tried Opera, we tried Chrome. We got to Firefox, we got it working, and I'm just thrilled that we got to have this conversation. Um, this is the sort of conversation we have on the academic channel because it is very detailed. It's it can be it usually is tedious, but this is where we're able to attack facts and just for the viewers out there, this is what professional creationism is like. It's it is work.
It
So
is work, but it is fun sometimes when you get near the end because, I mean, once you realize uh, um, that the Columbia basalt still has beryllium-10 in it, you go, wait a minute. And if, okay, there, you can go, yes, we got one, but what's more important, I think, is to say, can we repeat this? And there are formations out there that we could do it again. We could look at the Deccan traps in India. We could look at the Siberian traps, which are 55 and 240 million years old, and they should have no beryllium-10 in them. And apply the same measurements. You have to do it carefully because obviously you don't want to contaminate the stuff here. We'll have to do that another time. That's a whole different subject.
okay, just for the record, okay, guys, Dr. Tony that I debated, he was we were bashing each other, but we were civil enough. I said, Dr. Tony, can you? He said, I won't read anything that's not peer reviewed. And I said, sir, I take it you are a reviewer of for scientific journals, which means he actually will read stuff that hasn't been reviewed yet and put in a journal. That's how you qualify it. You have to read something that's not yet peer reviewed before it gets into peer review. And I asked him, will you review something from the ICR? He agreed. He's very generous. I sent him something. He gave a response. It was negative, but we got something moving forward. And he wrote me back and he said, well, I asked him permission if I could publish the letter publicly. He said, let me rewrite it so that it's publishable on the web. It's critical of our theory, but I don't know how I got on that topic. Oh, that had to deal with this question of isochron dating.
Yeah.
Because I'm having him review Jake Hebert's stuff, and I had dinner. It just was provident that the day of my debate with Dr. Tony, I was having dinner with Jake Hebert of the Institute of Creation Research. Dr. Hebert is a PhD from University of Texas, Dallas, and he's in physics, and he studied climate science, and he's working on isochron dating and criticizing the Milankovitch cycle. And we'll just see how successful this is, how well Jake has been able to engage the topic. I know how hard this is to kind of break through to the other side. I tell you, it was a bear to be able to get a peer-reviewed publication, and it was a Springer reference work. It took 4 of us to put it there. I was the least author in that group. The others were tenured or even retired professors in their field of expertise. I mean, this was brutally hard. We had to engage the other side to make sure everything we said was on the up and up. This is not an easy battle to persuade someone of Dr. Tony's caliber that that something has to change. But it can be done. It can be done, and even if we don't persuade him, we can at least persuade ourselves that we have a better argument. And that will, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, well, sometimes he's right. So I'm answering Snoil's question here. I'm hoping Dr. Hebert and I can one day talk and fill you in on the isochron dating. So.
Well, yeah, I actually have written a paper on it. It was for a back and forth between long agers and short agers. And it was interesting because the person on the opposite side basically paid no attention to what I'd written at all.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm laughing because it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And spent all of his time arguing against the concept of a change in decay rates, whereas I had not postulated particularly. I mean, it's a theoretical possibility, but at the time we did not have a lot of evidence for the change in decay rates. And so I was looking at it from a purely decay rate a constant decay rate point of view. And so the guy basically wound up shooting the guy next to me instead of shooting at me at all.
Well, I would certainly welcome having you to talk about that. Would you like to talk a little bit about your book that's available online and what people who might be able to read it and benefit? And then I'll also give you the last word on the stream because I'm about ready to pass out, Paul, and you won't have a host anymore.
It's okay. Well, we'll try to do it before you pass out. Basically, that material that I read on Berylium 10 was written about 1977. So if the references are a little bit old, although they're not dated as far as I know, because I haven't seen any new material that's really superseded what has been said there, particularly in that area. Now, they are dated for carbon-14 because it was quite early. But I think it's the first comprehensive creationist attempt to account for radiometric dating. And I can't prove it, but I suspect pretty strongly that it influenced a lot of other efforts, including the rate group.
Yes.
The rate group cited my book, so I know that that they had read it, and in some of the places they were citing it positively. So I think it's really important because radiometric dating is the big hammer that they use to try to kill short-age creationism. And once they do that, they try to use theological arguments for the various other creationist positions. And I think that it's not a bad tactic if you're on their side. And that means that we really have to tackle this head on. And so that's part of what I'm doing. Anyway, if you're interested, maybe you can put this when you put the link up eventually, you can put it down on the on the in the references that you have. It's scientifictheology.us.
Yes, I put it in the video description. So viewers, you can look at the video description. I put a link to Scientific Theology, and I guess it has the whole book right there in the website, which is very generous of you. Thank you.
And if you read that, you'll find out that I'm interested in a whole lot more than just the creation evolution controversy. although I think it does. I think it does occupy a central place in the debate.
Yes. Well, if you
With
haven't,
that, I will say to the I didn't catch the name. I'm not very good at names, unfortunately. It's one of my neurologic problems. But that's a story for another day. Thank you very much for your prayers while we were working on this.
yes. So Schnoil wanted to ask about the piezoelectric effect producing neutrons. I'm actually the one that had brought that to Dr. Giem last night when he called me. I had there is I had just been randomly Googling. It's just amazing what you'll find when you randomly Google just something, and you might find someone who's been working on it. I Googled piezoelectric fission, and I couldn't believe all the stuff that's been done on it and all the controversies surrounding it. So there is a Nature controversy about a group of professors in Italy who had been compressing granite and detecting neutrons, and people had just written that off as just crank them because you can't just use mechanical force and create neutrons. There was also a distinguished professor of physical chemistry at Texas A&M by the name of Bacchus, who had comparable experiments with explosions creating gold. And until I saw the paper in 2021 on heavy electron quasiparticles, I was very, very skeptical. But the paper on heavy electron quasiparticles shows how in the solid state you could have the creation of these quasiparticles that are like heavy electrons, or say muons. They can merge with a positive nuclei and make it neutral, and then another positive nuclei can then merge with it, overcoming the Coulomb barrier. You can get these reactions at very low very low energies, as in, maybe tens of electron volts, which is kind of like the energy of photons coming out of your flashlight, maybe a little higher.
I'm trying very hard to avoid getting into that too very much. Walt Brown has done a lot of work on that earlier, and then there's a number of other people. I'm not saying that Walt Brown's right on everything he says, but I am saying that he's looked at some research which is fascinating. So it's been around for a while, and then there's a bunch of stuff that shows that lightning can create various isotopes that nobody was expecting.
Exactly. So the important thing is the electrically induced fusion and transmutation is repeatable now. It's getting to the stage now it's so repeatable. NASA Glenn Research is able to do it with in the kilo electron volt range, which is like the X-ray energies. So this is amazing because at first they said, well, you need an atomic bomb to set this off because the temperatures have to be so high. They don't have to be high anymore. We're having fusion in the solid state, not the plasma state. This is just incredible. And people were saying this is not possible. It is. We're having repeatable experiments now because the interest in clean energy, for nothing else, to find alternative energy sources for spacecraft. And that's why NASA is so the reasons this repeatable operational research is moving forward. Now, when I put this on the table, I'm not saying it's right, but there's the prospect that it can be verified, and that's the important thing.
Yeah. The other thing is that we haven't run the numbers well enough to say that it's good enough to account for the difference between creationists and long age time frames. And this is one of those places where I think you can kind of have hope, but I wouldn't put faith in it quite yet until I might put faith in it that there is an answer. I think that's fair.
Yes, absolutely. And at the very least, it's going to put a monkey wrench in all of the, if we can demonstrate, I mean, especially the photonuclear processes with lightning, and we have confirmed lightning in earthquake events, we can't write that off as being able to change nuclear structure at this point. And there's some other effects. So this is all very exciting. And I think Paul and I both feel that there's going to be an avalanche or a dam break soon.
Yeah.
As far as, the other side cannot hold. And I've seen it with the collapse of abiogenesis. And then, we're beginning to see even some theoretical models of natural selection fail. We're finding, I mean, that's how come we got the paper through. It's because we didn't come up with anything new. We just wrote essentially a review paper that was just tallying all the problems that the evolutionists themselves have admitted, but no one, the popular press hadn't picked up on it. I think you have to answer a call there. So
no, that's just that's a notification that somebody sent me an email, and it's not important.
So and then I think there's the failure of eukaryotic evolution that's becoming really evident. So the dam is starting to burst in all sorts of spots.
Yeah. We will wait and see. Keep in mind that I don't think we will ever get to the point where no faith at all is necessary. And I don't think, but I think that it will get to the point where if people want to be honest, they will be persuaded. We are not necessarily completely there yet.
Yes.
And we need to, well, one of the things we need to keep in mind, and this is really important, is that if we win on there being a God, there being a flood, there being no reasonable way of putting creation off beyond, let's say, 10,000 years, and if we get really lucky, which we could, and we have a good explanation for how human history could be compressed into 4,300 years or 4,500 years, whichever it turns out to be. So the Masoretic text is correct. And we win on all that. And all we do is persuade people of that's the way Christianity makes people behave. I don't want to have anything to do with it. We have lost. It is vitally important that whenever we carry out these discussions, that we do it in a way where people feel, I'd like to be like he is.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding us.
It's important to remember that when Jesus talks about his disciples in John 17, he says, by this shall all men know that ye are my disciples. And it doesn't say that you got the creationist story right. It says that you love one another.
Love one another. Amen. Amen. Well, if it's okay with you, Paul, that's such a beautiful way to close the stream. I hope we can just shut it down now.
Okay.
I'm going to pass that. Thank you very, very much for your time. And I hope we can stay in touch. You have my phone number. I have yours. We have each other's emails. So
we'll do that.
And before I say goodnight, I want to thank you for a few years ago. You spent a lot of time on my website, invested a lot that has not gone to waste. I have continued to study these things because you had been willing to spend time with me. It sparked interest. I am now starting to migrate outside of biology, going back into my first love of physics. Now that I'm not a paid employee at Dr. Sanford, I'm free to do kind of take different paths of research, and so I just wanted to say personal thanks to you for that. All right, guys. Sorry I have to shut the stream. We had a lot of fun. Paul, I look forward to seeing you again. And take
Bye.
care. God bless you. Good
Love
night.
you. Love the people who have been listening, and apologize for making them wait for a while.
Well, we're all glad it came through, and we're thankful to Schnoil for Schnoil is out there on the other side of the Atlantic. This is in the middle of the night for him. So thank you, very special thanks for you, Schnoil. And God bless you all. Take care. Have a good night.
Good night.